Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisin, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And joining me out of Mexico, and where are you actually in Mexico?
Just a little bit outside of Playa del Carmen towards Tulum.
So, a beautiful part of the world. And I'm here in Encinitas, as most of my listeners know. I haven't changed locations in as long as I can remember. Um,
Nice.
but it's Brad Axelrad, and Brad has basically a website which I want to direct everybody to called faceyourdragon.com. Brad is an author, but more an author of podcasts, not particularly a book. Is that correct? I'm right.
I've been published in two books that weren't mine and two anthology books, but
Well,
not my own book.
right. But he's still an author and he is a coach and he helps people with these five dragons. I'm going to say a little bit about him. I've known him for quite some time. We reconnected here most recently when he was back up in Newport Beach. He produces a podcast show, and we were just speaking about that. And he's had some of the best-selling business owners, thought leaders, authors, coaches on, such as John Assaraf, Bob Proctor, Don Miguel Ruiz, Gay Hendricks, Ollie Brown, Michael Gerber, and more. He's also a founding member of ATL, Association of Transformative Leaders, and a co-founder of ATL Costa Rica, founded in 2017. He spends most of his time helping people, I would say coaching them, and you can go to his website and you're going to see a pop-up for free download. There you can also check out his website, or I should say his podcast, for all the people that he's worked with in doing that. I would highly recommend that you go do that. You can schedule a free call with Brad. There's a big button right there. Boom. Just click that button and schedule a call with him. And today we're going to be talking about this. Well, he's got a free paper that you can download, but we're going to be talking about these dragons that are in everybody's life, everybody out there. So, Brad, welcome to Inside Personal Growth. Let's just kick it off, and you can give us a little sneak peek into the five dragons and how they really kind of shaped your journey, because you say right in here, you were as afraid of anybody about public speaking in it as anybody could get when you started out, but you've overcome that fear. And there's a lot of people that are afraid of public speaking. Me too. That's why I use a podcast. It's a hell of a lot easier.
It's a little safer.
Yeah,
I get it.
safer. Yeah.
Well, yeah. You want me to jump in?
Yeah, I do. That's what
Awesome.
Yeah. The question was, how have these dragons kind of shaped your own journey?
Look, public speaking is the number one fear above dying. I still have it. You said I actually overcame the fear of public speaking, and I haven't. I still get nervous. I still get excited. And as the founder of Gestalt Therapy said, fear is excitement without the breath. So we so oftentimes forget to breathe. And when we're having these exciting moments, not fearful moments, we breathe and we use that energy to fuel our purpose, to fuel our message, to project our voice out in the world, to serve. And it's not so much about slaying your dragon, more about facing it and using the energy of your shadow into your great work in the world. And that's kind of how I came up with Face Your Dragon. I first heard about it years ago from Joseph Campbell, the creator of The Hero's Journey. And I heard him say, you got to face your dragon. I said, oh, that's good. And he went on and shared all about it and the shadow. And so that's really good. It never left me. But as you said, I came up with five main fears, and we can dive into them, but they're at the simplest level. It's imposter, scarcity, value, unheard, and critics. And these are running all of us at some level. They're running me and all the businesses I've started and co-founded or founded. And as business owners or speakers or authors or coaches, we we put ourselves out there and we bump into these, but we can dive into them more. But that's it in a nutshell.
Well, you talk about the shadow, and it was a big one on that was Ariel Ford's sister. He used to live in La Jolla.
Yep.
And she wrote a lot about shadows, and she had her own shadow because she finally ended up um, actually exiting this world in not the way you'd want somebody to exit, which was an overdose. And the interesting thing was is she had written about those shadows for some time. So it's interesting you bring it up because you had Ariel on the podcast,
Yep.
and obviously she addresses that as well because her sister had quite an influence on her. So talk with us about, you said there's 5 of them. Let's talk about it because your podcast has kind of been a source of inspiration when you look at all the people that are on here. Barnett Bain, who worked with Robin Williams, and I've interviewed, and he talks about the conundrum of doing and being.
Mm-hmm.
That's his big thing. What was the catalyst that led you to start, and how does it connect with these 5 dragon concepts?
Yeah, Barnett's just one of the most brilliant humans. I
It's a
just
wonderful
absolutely
guy.
adore Barnett. He's amazing. I mean, he produced What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams, which was my favorite movie years ago, and Celestine Prophecy, the movie, which is another favorite book by Stephen Redford. I just forgot his
Yeah,
Redland.
Redford. And then he did
Redford.
Milton, the one about the little
And he did
boy.
Milton's Secret, which was Eckhart Tolle's children's book, and he's just a fabulous, brilliant soul. So recognizing that we have these pains and challenges and fears and shadows, and I think actually I don't know that Debbie Ford died of an overdose. I for some reason thought she had cancer.
Maybe
I missed.
I could have been, if I was mistaken there.
Yeah,
But she did have a problem with
yeah,
alcohol and drugs. Okay, maybe it
yeah.
wasn't an overdose in the end, but her sister had said to me that my sister has had an amazing challenge with that. That's a shadow,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the shadow is there lurking to serve us if we're willing to turn the light on. I'll never forget that's what Barnett said in the Face Your Dragon podcast. But my work started at the Hoffman Institute. I became the Orange County, California graduate facilitator for the Hoffman process way back in 2005. And Debbie Ford birthed the shadow concept and the shadow effect, or whatever it was called, from the Hoffman process. That's where it came from. So I was the Orange County graduate facilitator, leading these groups of graduates and guiding them through for several years, coaching them to deepen the Hoffman work in their life. And after a while, I thought, it's kind of, I really want to take this conversation outside of the Hoffman work and move into more quantum physics and neuroscience and the law of attraction and anything else that was sort of present then. And, it started after my dad died. Like, that was the genesis of me finally saying, I'm ready to be in contribution. I need to be in service. That's the only thing that's going to fill up this, for lack of better terms, God-sized hole that they use in addiction circles, so that I could be in contribution, because self-indulgence wasn't working anymore. My father had passed. I needed something deeper to be in contribution. So I started the Hoffman graduate sort of circles. And then, like I said, I moved, fast forward a couple of years, started producing the events. And within 8 weeks, we manifested NBC Nightly News and PBS Television and USC News and LA Times, Orange County Register, all these things. So there's this big groundswell happening, watching my purpose surface. And as I was doing it, I was noticing all of the dragons that were kind of present for me. Like, who am I to be doing this? The imposter syndrome was just screaming at me. I'm standing on stage on national media and on getting interviewed. I'm like, wow, I'm relatively new to this. I've been leading transformation for like 3 years. Who am I to be doing this?
But who are you not to be doing it?
That's right. Yeah. So that's it. So that's where it sort of started. And then, fast forward, I've produced a couple hundred live events since then. And as you'd mentioned, for almost 15 years, a founding member of the Association of Transformational Leaders, with people like Miguel Ruiz and Barnett Bain and Ariel and lots of other people like that. And I still have these dragons that show up: imposter, scarcity, value, unheard, and critics. They still lurk. They're definitely a little less, but that's kind of the genesis of it. And launched the podcast because I want to interview all my friends. Like, Miguel Ruiz was guest number one of the Four Agreements. Gay Hendricks, guest number two. Christine Carlson from Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, number three. Barnett was number four. I had JP Sears.
How about
Ariel
Jack
Ford.
Canfield? Did you have Jack on?
Never
Jack
had Jack. I didn't. I need to get Jack on, but I did one season and paused it. I got pulled into this really beautiful blockchain platform that we were building, and that paused the podcast. And I one of these days I'll fire up season two, but I haven't yet.
Well, it's a great podcast for people to go to. You've had some really good guests and high quality interviews. And let's talk about that because, look, I said right in the middle of that, who were you not to be doing that Hoffman program? And the ego, because let's get to it, because the reality is we all know that the ego is there for two reasons. One, a lot of times it says we're not enough. And you could say, okay, well, it's there to protect us. But we could talk about ego for a long time. The key is not the fact that the ego was telling you weren't enough and you were an imposter and you doubted yourself. It was what you did to make amends with the ego, right?
Yeah.
To live comfortably with that. So what did you do? Because you kept doing those Hoffman programs and no one said anything.
Yeah, well, I wasn't referencing the imposter syndrome when I was leading the Hoffman process. It's when I stepped away from that and started manifesting all the major media outlets and was, a leader of a large community that I'd created. And it was amazing to have people like Pat Finn as the host and first speaker of our community's grand opening event. And Pat's amazing. He's dear friends with Michael Beckwith at Agape and was the host of the California Lottery Big Spin TV show and Joker's Wild and Shop Till You Drop. And he was a landmark forum teacher. I'm like, wow, who am I to be standing next to these titans of transformation as a leader? And we step in. So the shadow surfaces for us, but it really is our friend. Like you were just saying, we don't want to slay our dragon. We want to turn the light on in the room where the dragon's there scared, and we turn the light on and it goes away. So we want to illuminate our shadow and make friends with it. And that's really what it's about. It's about loving our fear and loving our imposter syndrome, loving our scarcity dragon. Like that's what it's about. It's about embracing these things and transforming them into fuel, because that's really where all of our power lives, is in the shadow.
Well, look, the subconscious mind is really, really controls a lot. And you and I both know that. And depending on how it was programmed, as Bruce Lipton said, you got to program it. So from ages 1 through 7, we were programming it. And we've been programming and still programming. The question is reprogramming. So in your experience, is there one dragon that most people struggle with? And if so, why? And why do you think it is that dragon? And out of those 5 that you've identified, I'm sure we could identify another 100 if we wanted, but what is it that people struggle with?
When I first was building this and downloading this and crafting it and birthing it into the world, I thought for sure it's imposter. And I still think that one's really high, but the more that I've had this platform and this message crafted for probably 8 years at this point. And I thought it was imposter, but what I'm really realizing is that it's more scarcity. And scarcity shows up everywhere. It shows up in money, in friendship, in just the lack of abundance is literally everywhere. And us, we've got the world at our fingertips with computers and living from the States. I mean, we're very blessed to be Americans in that sense, but scarcity is everywhere. Even in the wealthiest of areas, there's still this low level kind of never enoughness. I'm never enough. I'll never have enough money. I'm going to ruin everything and be poor again. I mean, whatever it is, like it's running everybody, especially in the pandemic. It resurfaced. You can see people's behaviors of acting tough and strong and all these other ways that was all fear-based. Everyone was really afraid, and fear manifests and shows up in all these different ways. And we try to overcompensate our lack of abundance. But I would say scarcity is really probably the most prevalent in all aspects.
Well, Brad, I would agree with you there. And I'll add to that. Recently Thomas More was on here. He wrote a book called The Eloquence of Silence. I think he's written like 23 books.
Wow.
And we started talking about emptiness. Now that's a Buddhist kind of philosophy, okay? But emptiness, look, and if somebody's bucket is empty, our society doesn't like that. You got to go fill that up again, whether it's, people you want to talk to, or friends, or money, or relationship, or cars, or houses, or whatever it is. It's not cool to have an empty bucket, to sit in silence. I just got back from a 6-day meditation retreat. I was 2 days in silence.
Cool.
But the cool thing is what you receive as a result of, and that's where I'm going with this question with the shadow. Do you believe one of the biggest fears that people have because they don't want to address it is our own demise? Because in the Buddhist tradition, on one end is Buddha, on the other end is a skeleton. And when you do a walking meditation, a monk will tell you, hey, there was a monk story there at the retreat, which I've heard many times. A Rinpoche comes, says, what is there anything I can get for you? I want to get a watch. Great. What do you want the watch for? I want to remind myself, I'm going to set it because it has a timer on it, and every hour the time's going to go off, and it's going to tell I'm 1 hour closer to death. And you think to yourself, right? Do you want a reminder? Most people in this society, the Western culture, they don't embrace it. Now, I think it's a big fear. That's one of the biggest fears that we don't want to address, is the fact that we're impermanent, that the bucket can be empty, right? What would you say about that? I mean, share a transformative story of someone who came face to face with their dragons. Maybe that's one of the biggest dragons, and the guidance that kind of emerged to make them stronger.
Yeah, there's so many ways to answer that, and so many layers to all that you shared. I've been studying Taoism for a very long time, almost probably 25 years at this point, and just appreciate the way of nature and what you're saying about the emptiness there. And but what's crazy is the fear of public speaking is above that fear of death for most. That's I always find that so fascinating.
They do say that. Yes.
Yeah. So boy, a story of somebody who's faced their dragon. Trying to think how to really frame that. I mean, what comes to mind just for me is the fear of public speaking, and how that became my greatest gift and my greatest contribution, and having the courage to lean into that and recognize what I like to say on my podcast is what we're most resisting and most afraid of are the very things that'll set us free. It's our gift to humanity, our money maker, and our purpose on the planet. So if there's something that you're really noticing fear and resistance to, that's where you need to go. Like, fear means go. If there's resistance, perfect. Keep leaning in, like that's where we're going to open up all the opportunities we've been seeking. So I'm just thinking of myself on my own personal hero's journey of coming through the despair and then ultimately coming back with the elixir. And the despair was, as I watched my father take his last breath, and 36 hours later being at the Hoffman process for the second time. And that wasn't planned. I just happened to end up there. And it was through that despair that I was able to recognize the beauty in my pain, the beauty in my in my darkest days. That was the biggest contribution that sprouted from that. So yeah.
But you're saying, I think, we do, all of us struggle with that, whether it's fear of public speaking or, you coming back, your father dying 36 hours later, being involved in this. And what comes up for me is something we used to say in the spiritual psychology course, and this would actually be something that would be quite relevant to your dragons. One, you don't have to believe everything you think.
Amen to that.
Two is, and I remember Byron Katie.
Yeah.
She used to say, and she's been on the show a couple of times.
Cool. She's great.
Is it true? Is it really true? Right?
Are you sure? Are you certain it's true? Yeah.
Are you certain it's true? Right? And she'd put people up on stage and she'd get them to, oh, I hate my partner. He's a bastard. He's a this, that. Is that really true? Well, they think about it a little bit more, right? You heard it all. My point is that's like the dragon, isn't it? It's like slaying the dragon. Because in essence, right now, we've formulated a thought and we live in the world of making stuff up. Then we begin to believe what we made up. And then we have to undo what we made up that we were believing was right.
Well, I'm laughing at our silly. I'm just laughing at our silly human experience and how we get so programmed from church and from our childhood and from school and community and culture, and we really are pulling from up to age 7, like you said, and that's really what Hoffman goes in and sort of ferrets out and heals a lot of that childhood patterning and programming. And then you lead from your spiritual essence. It's such a beautiful process. I pray everybody checks it out at hoffmaninstitute.org. It's just beautiful work. I'm not affiliated. Just please go look. And again, I can't help but laugh. There's such great power in us having the courage to face these programs and patterns, because that's it. We're just constantly being imprinted everywhere we go, the media, friends, church.
Well, it's so true. I think Bruce Lipton said it to me the other day. Look, the matrix is real. You're going to take the red pill, you're going to take the blue pill. The reality is, you said quantum physics about 5 minutes ago. And so what physical vibrational plane do we exist that we really believe is here? I can bang on this desk and the atoms in this desk. I can't put my fist through it, right? But the reality is that I could if I was vibrating at a different level. Okay.
Probably.
Yeah. Well, probably to scientifically. Yeah, we could say
scientifically you can, but I don't know. Right, I don't know many that have figured out how to do that yet, but I totally hear you.
Nobody that I know, maybe if they're an avatar, they could maybe do that. You and I, hey, if power versus force, and the reality is that the Dalai Lama is at, whatever level he's vibrating at, great. But, you've worn so many hats, you've been in this self-help area for a long time, and your 5 Dragons has been around for a long time. What approach that you're taking makes this distinct and probably different and maybe more effective than other methodologies that we might see someplace else? In other words, look, you've got a program here, you've got a big website, you've got a podcast that you said you paused, but you're going to bring it back. But this is at its core is what you love to do, right? Help people with this.
Yeah. So
forget the crypto coin thing, because that's gone. But
what's sprouted from this in recent weeks, and I think you'll appreciate this, Greg. I've been on about 15 podcasts in the last 3 weeks, and it's been this fun sort of push to get back out and share my message, because like Jason Silva says, if you guys have ever seen who he is, he's an amazing orator and channel. He just speaks these incredible flows and gets in these flow states and speaks. But he says that if we're not sharing our message in a way, it's like there's this welling up and he's going to burst if he doesn't get it out and actually, serve people with what's coming through him and out of his mouth. And so what I mean by that is, and how it's manifested in the last couple of weeks, is I'm finding that a lot of people want to share a message. And that's how I really started this whole platform. It's, you want to be a speaker, author, coach, event producer, podcaster, author, but you're afraid. And one of these things is keeping you from doing it. So you don't get started, or you start it and you stop. Get started and you stop. So that was the initial sort of impetus and genesis of this brand. It's like I've seen so many people, including myself, struggle. We start, we stop, we start, we stop. Then we just don't do it. So that was the beginning of it. But what I'm finding now is that most people are really ready to share a message and they want to get on podcasts, because to me, it's one of the best ways. You know, producing the podcast is one thing, but getting on other people's audiences, I don't have to do any of the production, the editing, the social media
Yeah.
graphics, the promoting. You're doing all that, Greg. Then
Yeah.
all these other podcasters are doing it for me that I am on, and they're creating all this content. So I had this brilliant idea because I figured out a system how to get people on podcasts. So Face Your Dragon is the flagship sort of core offer of courage into clients, which is what I've been teaching for a long time. It's how to build a platform, build the message, overcome your fears, get your message out there. But get me on podcast.com. That's the new push that all of this encapsulates to get people out sharing their message and on tons of podcasts. So that's the new exciting push that we're up to now.
Well, again, we've got, as you said, sitting there in Mexico, so much in the way of technology at our hands today,
Yep.
with the advent of AI, right? And the
Also
ability
true.
to distribute more of this in a different way. I think it's sharing a message. I would agree. You've got a great message. I would also say it's about the assimilation of all these messages that we're receiving, because social media is so prolific, and finding a commonality to do good in the world. It's one thing to
Nice.
listen to all this stuff. It's another thing to take action on all this stuff and to be a good force for the world, right? And so for the listeners who might be feeling a little apprehensive about facing some of their own dragons, right? It's going back to your dragons. What one piece of advice would you give to embolden them to really take a first step? Because sharing your message, okay, that's an action, right? That's an action. You're sharing it on a podcast. But as you know, I turned this podcast into something for good, compassionate
So beautiful
communications,
what you did. It's brilliant.
helping solve a big, big problem that I can make a small dent in, right? Which is homelessness. I don't care what I think Stephen Kotler said this to me a bazillion times, been on here 6 or 7 times. One thing he
Wow.
says is, he says, Brad, focus is for free. Okay. Curiosity, we all have. Turning a curiosity into purpose is the next thing, and finding a deeper purpose for why you exist on the planet. Then from that purpose, defining, okay, your vision, your values, your goals, everything you need to do. But the process that he kind of identified, from focus to curiosity to then purpose, is really quite valuable. And I think that's when you have a dragon, if you're going to live in cooperation with that dragon, you're literally going to define that purpose and make a difference. Where would you tell somebody today who's apprehensive and saying some of the best thing you could do would be to face the dragon, turn the light on, and proceed forward to do something for good? What would you tell them?
Such a good question. The process first and foremost is really to find your fear, because most of the time it's hidden. We don't know what it is. We think it's something else. So really doing the deep work, and the access into that deep work of finding it can be many different things. You know, some will use plant medicine, therapy, vision quests, right? Like anything you can do to put yourself in that situation to open you up enough to finally get in touch with whatever that hidden aspect is in you. So it's finding it first, then it's about facing it and having the courage to really tune into it and to commune with it, and to get courageous and be brave and recognizing that that's your power, and then using it. So it's find, face, and use. So it's interesting what you say. And you know, we have our voice nowadays, and that's the one thing we all have. Like you're saying, with technology, we all have this capacity to use our voice for good. And I think of Don Miguel Ruiz in might be the Mastery of Love. It might not even be the Four Agreements that almost everybody knows. but we want to use our voice and our, no, it's be impeccable with your word, which is, I think, in the four agreements, of course.
It
And
is.
and our voice has power. And we want to make sure that we are wielding our voice in a way that is moving things forward and serving things forward. So, being so focused on sharing a message, that's really what this was about. It's find your fear, share your message. That's sort of how it started. And it's really about having the courage to be a messenger. And, there are a lot of us out there now, and thankfully we can hear so much good information. But now when you say having a higher purpose, like you've aligned your business with, I want to speak to that coin or crypto platform we were building, because it was such a brilliant idea. We were essentially going to be mobilizing A-list celebrities and influencers, and even Joe hanging out on a banjo in Minnesota to create content for good. It was a platform, a live streaming platform, to have everybody out there raising funds for charities and disaster relief with full transparency around having insights into money that was raised and where it went. So I pray that somebody builds something like that again and actually uses content for good, content for a change, content for change. It was such a cool platform, but something like that, I think, would be really, really profound. It's not going to be me building it, but that just came up.
I would concur that taking all this energy and redirecting it, finding the right place to put it for good. And humility is another big area, right? And I think you can do this still with tons of humility and purpose, right? You don't have to be like the star on the stage, like the people that might be listening going, oh yeah, look at Greg Boyson. Yeah, he's done 1,100 podcasts and he's got Brad on and all that. Forget all that. I'm just a regular guy, right? The point is, and I'm going to use this example, okay? And this is a good story. About a year ago, or maybe less, I get contacted by National Geographic, and they said, hey, we want to have you put on Dan Bittner, the guy that founded the Blue Zones. And he's written a new cookbook called The Blue Zones America. I didn't know much about Dan, but I just watched a new Netflix documentary that was just on just 4 or 5 nights ago about living to age 100. It's not just the cookbook. Here's the point. He went from being an investigative journalist, right, where he was traveling around looking at where all these blue zones were and trying to figure out how people are living to 100, to actually now creating a blue zones transformational environmental project where he goes into cities and he gets them to change all the walk pathways, the bicycle pathways, the things that need to be done to change people's BMI and make people healthier. So the bigger mission wasn't just about finding centurions. It was about him creating something where he could actually go and change massive amounts of change. So he went in the city in near Minneapolis, and he was expecting a BMI change of like 2 point something percent. And he ended up with 3 point something 5%, which was like amazing. And my point is, when you have a bigger mission, right, than just finding the centurions, it's one thing to find them. It's another thing to use the information you get and then impart it on other people to have them change their lives. Right. And that is a great message. So, look, you've kept evolving the 5 dragon concepts. And is there anything new or upcoming programs you want the listeners to know about that are literally, in your pathway right now, or that are banging on your head and saying, hey, this is what Brad's going to do? Because I think they'd want to know.
Yeah. So like I'd mentioned, I'm getting interviewed on lots of podcasts, and you can find those on the faceyourdragon.com media tab. And if that's of interest to listen to others, really fun to be on this sort of media tour, sort of unexpected media tour. But as I'd mentioned, we figured out a really cool way to get people on podcasts. And that to me is opening up the channels for folks to share their messages. And that's just getmeonpodcasts.com, really clear. And what's fun is I get to weave a lot of this dragon facing your fear, sharing your message stuff into that. It's coaching around it, it's media coaching, it's AI coaching, it's social media coaching. And when I say media coaching, it's how to be effective on a podcast, how to be effective on NBC Nightly News, things like that. So that feels like the next opening for me, where I'm taking my whole body of work and my life experience and pouring it into folks so they can get out and share their message far and wide. And that's just really lighting me up right now.
Well, the good thing about that is that, you can become like the media, the CMO, the chief marketing officer, to help people figure out how to get their messages out there, whether it's on a podcast or it's through social media or it's through other channels, which I see that in you. I see you lit up, you're like lit up right now around that. And when we go off the air here, I'm going to give you a gentleman's name who has the list of every podcast show and has kind of talked with me about kind of the same thing, but I'd rather gift it to you because it isn't in my band. It isn't in my bandwidth. Right.
Right.
So if you were to sum up the essence of the work, I get that you're real excited about this, and there's a lot of people listening to this show that probably want to be on podcasts, and I'm going to just tell them to go contact you and schedule a call. Hit the button, talk with you, see where the conversation goes, because he has this experience. I want the listener to know, and Brad can do this for you, right? I'm 100% convinced this isn't new to Brad. It's something that's resurfaced for Brad. Okay. Anybody that could take the Hoffman thing, explode it, and get all that media attention that you did, you're the best PR guy around, right? So how would you?
That was all self-generated too. I didn't have a publicist. I got myself on LA Times, Orange County Register, CBC Radio in Canada. Yeah, anyway.
There's an art to all of this, and there's a
For sure.
science to it, and there's a way to kind of do it. And no matter what anybody says, the old cliche is it's kind of not always what you know, but who you know, especially in the PR business, to get through doors, to get people on TV shows, to get them wherever you need to do. Brad's your guy. So in essence, kind of sum up the work, what you'd like people to take away from how to face your dragons, and in one kind of sentence or a couple of sentences, what would that be? What is the philosophy that, we've talked about the shadow, we've talked about a lot of things during this podcast, but what might that be?
It's really simple. Fear is your friend. Learn to love your fear, learn to embrace it and not resist. Just trust that beautiful, oh my gosh, I'm afraid, breathe. The cave we fear to enter holds the treasure we seek. Joseph Campbell, like that's one of the most profound quotes I've ever heard. Like what you're most resisting, open up to it. What you're most afraid of, open up to it. That is where the gold is. The treasure's there. So that's it. Yep.
Well, and I would tell my listeners from many people I've had on the show, but one in particular, Brian Ullman, Dr. Brian Ullman.
I know Brian, hypnotist, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you do know him, so you got it. He's an interesting guy.
He's awesome.
Went to India and in search of enlightenment 5 or 6 times. And went all around all these people, and one of the masters of wisdom said, "So Brian, what is your definition of enlightenment?" He said, "I don't know." He says, "That's why I'm here. I want to be enlightened." And I love the science. And he said, "Well, really, enlightenment is pretty simple." And Brian's listening, and this guy says, "It is 100% acceptance of self." Right? And I say that because the 5 dragons with the fear revolves around self-acceptance. who are you to actually carry this fear and be
Mm,
afraid, as you said, of entering into the cave with the dragon, right? Because that's where you're going to slay it. Um, and as you know, and I said this when we did the pre-interview, I had the blessing of being part of a book called The Precipice of Life, the lessons learned by living on a mountaineer's edge, right? I interviewed all these mountaineers. And in the end, the theory there around the fear of climbing Everest, climbing all the highest 7 summits, whether it was a male or a female or whatever it was they said you live your life most when you're facing that fear,
yep.
not when you're going away from that fear. I
Yep.
know that's hard for some people to really comprehend. It's like, you mean I've got to go climb Everest at 26,000 feet to literally face that
Is
fear
that
of
what it
death?
is? 26,000. Wow.
Yeah, or 24, whatever it is. But,
Jeez.
I had the honor of interviewing all these people who had done all these highest peaks on the 8 continents, right? And I mean, I'm talking like
Mm,
25 of them. But
very cool.
most of them, Brad, all said the same thing. If you're not facing that fear, we're talking about fear now, right? You're not living,
Yep.
right? Now, I know everybody out there that's contrary. It's like, oh my God, I need to be safe. I want to be in my little house. I want to do what I do, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is that was a big one. Your comment on that, just as a kind of an ending note here for this podcast, what would you say?
Uh, I come from a semi-professional motocross racing background, and I think of the flow states and how we are most alive in a flow state, and when we're pushing the edge, especially the masculine is most alive pushing the envelope. So I would say that with the absence of adrenaline addiction, which was something I had chased for a long time, you are 100% accurate that pushing and just being fully alive, that's when of course we're obviously most alive. And I would challenge everybody watching this to go do what you're most afraid of. If it's speaking, lean in. Exposure therapy is huge. If you're afraid of heights, which I still haven't fully faced that one yet in an airplane or bungee, I will be a little hypocritical and say, go do that.
Well,
Yeah.
I
So
think I'd say you're absolutely right. And I think the advice you're giving is good. And,
yeah.
Brad, as a soul on this planet from one soul to another, you're a blessing. Uh,
Thank you,
Thank you,
brother.
man.
Likewise.
Namaste for being on Inside Personal Growth, spending some time with our listeners, talking about facing your 5 dragons. Go to the website, it's faceyourdragon.com. As you all heard, he has a passion for, I'm going to just call it PR work. So if you want to get in front of a lot of podcasters, click that button for schedule your free call. Brad, thanks so much for being on.
Thank you, brother. It's an honor. I've been wanting to be on this show for 15 years, so it's really great to be here,
Well, we
Jay.
got it done. I only been doing it 17, so we're so there we go. We finally got there.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, man.